Hello everyone, this is part 13 of What If Naruto was in Anbu at 6, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to share, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Join my membership, the perks are great. It's in the description. 9 years have passed since Uzumaki Naruto formally declared himself the Godime Hokage of Konoha, in which time, he has suppressed rebellions and uprisings within the recently conquered lands of Kiri, Kusa, Am, Oto and Taki and stabilized his control around the area. His rule, though relatively short and naturally underestimated due to his youth, proved to be a prosperous one. Because of Konoha's rapid increase in power, territory and ninja force, their reputation also grew and so clients came from everywhere in order to hire, which granted the region a substantial profit increase, allowing other projects which had been put off due to lack of economic support from the standing governments to be brought back to life. Also, because there was an almost assured cease of aggression between previously hostile regions, the checkpoints were removed, the roads were repaired, or built where there were previously none, granting free travel between the different countries. A relative sense of peace had been brought back to the region. In the remaining ninja villages the situation was quite different though. In Suna, civil, military and political unrest continued to plague the region, and only recently had Gaara been able to gain any form of control of the situation. Rumors had it that it was because of some new council members that had been admitted in only 2 years earlier. In Iwa, a status of high alert was present on the area at all times. The borders, checkpoints, supply routes and key bases were fully manned. Missions that were accepted were only accepted B class or higher. Very few C classes were accepted if any at any time, allowing the genin in the village to train and prepare themselves for the storm all knew would be coming. The Tsuchikage Yoshihiro himself looked over the training of every first-year genin and higher. No chunin exams were hosted within the village, and anyone that wished to enter or exit the village was checked thoroughly before being granted their leave. Movements in Kumo had ceased almost entirely. No ninja had been reported leaving or entering their borders, and spies dressed as civilians with their chakra sealed who had entered the village had reported only possible sightings of ninja. From what could be gathered outside the village, missions were rarely taken and little to nothing was heard of the wreckage. It was as if the ninja of the region had suddenly dropped off the face of the earth, and all that was left were the echoes of ghosts. To most, this seemed to be the calm before the storm, and they were right. Naruto's ambitions of world peace through conquest would soon be reignited. He now had the money, the manpower and the resources to go with his ambition, and soon the world will once again fear the demon of Konoha. The War Room is what this place was called. It was a room specifically designed for war councils. It was built as an extension of the Hokage Tower just 1 year after Naruto was formally declared the Godime Hokage of Konoha. The room was circular, about 35 feet in diameter. Dramatized portraits of the 4 previous Hokages hung from the walls. The Shodime as he stood, his hands in a simple seal which framed the necklace he once wore, which was now worn by his granddaughter Tsunade. A lush green forest was the background set for him. The Nadime stood with the Raijin in a ready stance atop a jagged rock, the waves of the ocean crashing behind him. The Sandime, in his younger days wearing his classic battle armor and shinobi equipment, wielding his old summon and friend Enma as flames danced around him. And finally the Yondime, an especially dramatized portrait where he held his trademark kunai in one hand, a Rasengan in the other, as he stood atop the head of the toad boss Gamabunta, which could be scarcely made out due to the red bumpy floor as he faced down the Kyubi no Kitsune, its 9 tails in a seeming frenzy as its red eyes seemed to follow you as you walked past. There was a large red oak round table in the room, the center of which held a massive map of the continent. Twin mahogany doors barred the entrance. Currently gathered here were the familiar faces of many Konoha ninja. Mito Gai and his students Rock Lee and Sukumi Tenten, the Hyuga clan head Hinata and her sister Hanabi, Hitaki Kakashi, Yuhi Kurenai, the Toad Sanin Jiraiya, Kaguya Kimimaro, Tayuya, Saken, Jirabu, Kidomaru, Morino Ibiki, the newly instated clan head Aberrane Shino, and finally, last but not least, Materashi Anko. Mito Gai had changed little in 9 years. His eccentric nature, horrid clothing and ridiculously large eyebrows remained. In his mid to late 30s he was still considered one of the strongest ninjas in the village, and his still impeccable physical health showed it. Rock Lee, however, had changed some. Like his sensei, he still held the boisterous personality, youth preaching speeches and ridiculous training regiments. However, his choice in wardrobe had changed some, which was enforced by Tenten. He now wore a white Chinese-style shirt, with black loose-fitting pants and black shoes. His hair was no longer in a bowl cut, but was rather pulled back in a long braid which reached his mid-back. Now standing at 5 feet 10, he was almost as tall as his sensei, and despite his somewhat embarrassing nature had his own little fan club. Tenten had not changed much over the years. She was now considered Konoha's #1 weapons expert and wielder, and anyone that chose to face her with one was almost certain to lose. She also wore a short cloak which reached her hips, with which she used to hide said weapons and scrolls. Underneath that she wore a long-sleeve form-fitting white shirt, along with a pair of dark black pants with white sandals. Between the fabrics lay a thin chain mesh which would help stop incoming kunai or slash attacks. At the age of 23 she was currently dating Lee. Hinata had also changed over the years. She had filled out nicely and was considered one of, if not the most attractive woman of her age group in all of Konoha. Unfortunately, she was also considered Konoha's resident ice queen. Her features, narrow and delicate as they were, hid a silent strength and determination within them. Her dark hair, which was only enhanced by her white clothing, reached her lower back as it hung freely. At 21, her experiences within the Hyuga house had hardened her and made her into a skilled politician and warrior. Hanabi had changed little in terms of appearance, except for the fact that she was now taller, more filled out, and wore mostly black clothing, a contrast to her sister. At the age of 17 she was considered a prodigy among her clan members. Hitaki Kakashi, much like his arch-rival, Maito Guy, had changed in little to no ways during the last 9 years. The only real visible difference on the man was a jagged scar that went down the right side of his face, which was mostly hidden beneath the mask. Yuhi Kurenai, the genjutsu mistress of Konoha, had not changed at all in the 9 years, and despite her age of 36 didn't look a day over 28. Jiraiya, though in clothing and personality hadn't changed, one could now tell the various signs of his age as the years caught up with him. Once white teeth now sported a thin shade of yellow as the first signs of wrinkles began to sag his skin at the age of 59. He was also slower than he had been before. Having been diagnosed with arthritis at 54, the Toad Sage was beginning to have trouble forming hand seals as fast as he used to, but still enough to keep up with most of the younger ninja regardless. Kimimaro and other members of the Sound 4 now wore green cloaks with different kanji for numbers 1 through 5 on them, written in dark red, and were now considered Konoha's elite bodyguard unit for high-paying clients and, of course, the Hokage. Morino Ibiki, like Jiraiya, also began to show signs of his age as he now had to walk with a cane and a slight limp due to an injury he received on a mission. At the age of 38 he was still considered the top interrogator within Konoha. For his appearance he now sported a groomed beard which was beginning to show signs of grey. He still, however, wore the trench coat and bandana which identified him so well. Aburame Shino, now head of the Aburame clan, after his father Shibi died of a heart attack 7 months ago, wore a simple beige trench coat with a high collar. His hair was short. The glasses were still present, however, and the boy continued to remain the silent observer of the group. Materashi Anko, though, hardly changed at all. The massive doors opened slowly, silencing all conversations in the room as the Godime Hokage walked through. He stood at 6 feet 2, the cage robes and hat making him seem all the more regal and imposing than he already was. The slightly darker whisker marks identifying him as the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi scarred his cheeks. His slit blue eyes caught the eyes of all in the room before he spoke in the deep and commanding voice they had all become accustomed to. "Good, you are all here." Before he pulled out his chair and sat down, gesturing the others to do the same. "Now, let us begin this planning session." Sunagakur. The Godime Kazekage, Gaara stood with his arms crossed and glaring at the closed door before him. The glaring red light of emergency stood out above the white double doors as nurses and doctors scurried about the hallway, rushing past him as they went to do their rounds. He wore white and rust-red robes. The hat with the kanji for wind sat proudly atop his full head of blood-red hair. Flanking him were the familiar forms of his sister, Sabaku Temari, and his friends, Inazuka Kiba and Akamaiki Chuji. For many years the former Konoha refugees had struggled and fought for Suna citizenship, and relatively recently, with some pulled strings from Gaara and his siblings, they had achieved it, also granting Inazuka Hana, Akamaiki Chuji, Nara Shikamaru and Yamanaka Ino positions on the councils of Suna as officially instated clans. They, of course, fully supported any decision to go to war against Konoha, and so now with their help the unrest had begun to stabilize after almost a full decade, and most of Suna was ready to go to war should the need arise, but still most were fearful of beginning something they could not finish, especially now that the Kyuubi Jinchuriki seems to have calmed some during the recent years. Hey buddy, don't worry about it. I'm sure Kankuro will be fine, Kiba said as he patted him on the back. The dog user had grown in the 9 years that had passed, now standing at roughly 6 feet 2 he was the tallest of the group. His messy mop of brown hair went down nearly beneath his shoulder blades. Akamaru had also grown, nearly to the size of a very healthy horse. Too big to enter the hospital. Kiba had grown stockier, putting on a few more muscles than what was commonly had in the shinobi world. He now wore 2 metal shoulder pads, leather belts crisscrossing his upper body which held sealing and summoning scrolls, and specially designed blades which could be placed within Akamaru's mouth and shackled to his legs, which proved devastating for quick hit and run tactics. He also carried specially designed kunai which were enhanced with seals which converted his natural earth affinity into wind affinity. There were only 2 problems with that. One, after about 5 minutes of use they wore down and broke apart, and they were expensive. Yeah, Chuji added. He's a tough guy, I'm sure he'll walk out of that room once they're done, complaining about how long they took. Chuji now wore a samurai-style armor, something that was hardly ever used in their line of work seeing as how cumbersome and heavy it is. But the hardened armor complemented Chuji's clan skills to the point where he had learned to work around it. His spiky gruff hair nearly reached his knees now as he held it all cropped back in a ponytail. Gaara and Temari allowed themselves some small smirks at the thought. They could see Kankuro doing something like that. Still, Kankuro's spinal column was injured badly in the last mission and the operation was a delicate one. If even one mistake was made, it was possible Kankuro's ninja career could very well be over. Hopefully it wouldn't come to that. Kankuro was infamous for his pranks, and being stuffed in Suna for the rest of his days would carve a horrible path of destruction that would be remembered for decades. Right. Luckily Gaara was confident that if anyone could help Kankuro it was the 2 kunoiki in there right now, Ino and Sakura. They were 2 of the top medics of Suna, having studied under Chio, the puppeteer mistress and one of the finest medics Suna had ever produced. Unfortunately, Chio had died from her age years ago as she had begun teaching Sakura the beginnings of puppeteering. Kankuro, however, had taken up her training in the art as best he could. Her training in the puppeteer arts, however, was still nowhere near as good to match any truly advanced ninja for any real length of time. She couldn't match Kankuro in it, and she was a far cry from legendary puppeteers like Chio and Sasori of the Red Sands. But she more than made up for it with her medical techniques and skills in genjutsu. Ino, however, had poured herself into her clan techniques, due to the fact that most of the Yamanaka clan techniques had been lost in what was now called the Great Konoha Massacre with the death of her father and most of her relatives. Unlike Chuji's and Shikamaru's, she had focused almost entirely on creating and honing personal techniques she created herself from scratch. Temari watched as her 2 friends tried to reassure them of Kankuro's impeccable physical condition with a small smile gracing her features. The years had certainly been kind to her. Curves were in all the right places. Tanned skin and her signature 4 pig-tailed hairstyle made sure that every male in Suna knew who Sabaku no Temari was. She also made sure to let them know she was out of all their leagues. She now wore a simple, long-sleeved black top which left her stomach exposed. 2 slits went down either side of the strangely designed shirt which reached her knees. She wore tight black pants beneath a long skirt which was cut open on the front, back and sides which served to sometimes confuse an enemy in close combat. A belt with several kunai attached was around her waist as well as one elegant yet wickedly curved dagger strapped to her ankle. The sound of clacking footsteps brought their attention behind them to the hallway, where they saw Hana and Shikamaru running towards them. We just returned from the mission and heard what happened. Hana skidded to a stop next to them. Is the troublesome idiot all right? Shikamaru said as he lit his cigarette, only to have it batted out of his mouth by a ticked-off Temari. We're in a hospital, jackass. The people here don't need lung cancer to add to their problems. Scoffing, he crossed his arms and in his signature display muttered, troublesome woman. Only to receive a solid kick in the nuts for his efforts. He groaned before he crumpled to the floor in a heap. Every male in the room winced as they watched the shadow user groan and gasp for breath. He hadn't changed physically throughout the years, simply grew taller and sported a few more battle scars which were visible behind his signature fishnet clothing as well as one large scar on the left side of his head. Hannah also hadn't really changed, though she now sported a much more mature look and feel about her in comparison to the 17-year-old who had stumbled into Suna nearly a decade ago. She also carried herself in a much more guarded manner, something she had gained in her dealings with the council no doubt. Gaara ignored Shikamaru's pain and spoke to Hannah. We don't really know anything at this point. Hopefully soon Sakura or Ino will be able to come out to give us some kind of news. As if waiting for the call of the Kazekage, the red light above the door turned off and the small creaks indicating its opening, revealing Sakura in her hospital garb. Her hair was now short, merely reaching her neck so as not to get in the way in either missions or delicate surgeries. Bloody smears adorned her form as she wiped the sweat off her brow. She looked up to the gathered crowd who each held their breath and smiled, softly, allowing them all to breathe a sigh of relief. She wiped her hands as she spoke. He's resting now, but he's likely to make a full recovery with some physical therapy. Gaara nodded and one saw his shoulders visibly sag in relief. Thank you, Sakura. Can we see him now? Temari asked from behind her brother. She offered a small apologetic smile as she shook her head. Sorry, but he really needs his rest for now. Hopefully tomorrow he'll be well rested enough for us to allow you to go in and see him. Gaara nodded and sighed in something akin to exhaustion. Very well, you heard her. Everyone get back to work, God knows I have to. Temari smiled as her brother turned and strolled out the hallway back to his office. She would take him some lunch or something later, hopefully that would cheer him up. Kumogakure, Reikage residence. Zhu Liang stood off to the side of his personal training field as Kumogakure's two resident Jinchurikis battled it out. He had not changed in the slightest with the passing of the years. He still looked exactly the same as he did 10 years ago, not one more wrinkle or scar or anything. Akina, however, had changed, no longer the young, slip of a girl that had come, battered and exhausted from her encounters with her, as of yet unknown, brother. She now stood at 5 feet 8 and held a physique that could match any healthy kunoichi. Her form was lean and built for speed, agility and flexibility. She wielded a 3-piece staff which could connect together to form a single 6-foot-long staff. She wore dark blue clothing. A long blue-sleeved shirt with slightly loose wrists. It parted at her navel, that however was covered in bandages. She wore light blue pants with a bright red cloth as a belt. It fit her loosely, with the end of it hanging down her side and reaching down to her calf. On her hips were 2 twin curved daggers, and on a leather belt which went over her right shoulder and under her left arm was a small clasp in which she used to hang the staff from her back. Her control over the deadly force of Kyuubi's chakra had grown as well. She could now easily control 3 tails and keep them active for a solid 30 minutes. The 4th tail, however, continued to prove unstable, and all attempts so far at controlling the colossal level of chakra and bloodlust that came with it always ended in failure. He remembered the first time they had attempted to control that state, and he would never forget it, neither would many in Kumo. It had been nearly impossible to keep the incident under wraps, but he had managed with the help of his wife, apprentice and Tsunade. Speaking of the slug Sanin, she had been key to his plans within Kumo so far. She was now leading the hospital and had been immensely helpful in keeping many of their nins alive. Their manpower was growing every day because of her, and that was something they would need if they were to survive the coming fire. Liang watched as Yugito was sent tumbling to the floor from a solid swing which connected with her stomach, leaving her winded as she recovered and slipped back into her fighting stance. Yes, they would need every piece to win this game. Yoshihiro looked over some documents as he inspected the storehouse. So, we have enough grain to last us approximately how long here? Almost 5 months, Tsuchikage-sama. The man replied as he bowed to the larger man which easily towered over him. Yoshihiro was, despite his age of 68, he was still every bit as imposing as he was 10 years ago, easily towering over almost all of his subordinates as he stood at 6 feet 5, he held his back straight, refusing to slouch forward as most men his age do. His tanned skin and handlebar mustache and short ponytail was still in place. Yoshihiro held back a few coughs which threatened to escape his throat as he pounded his chest a few times before it cleared. Right, ration it as best you can, I got a feeling that soon enough we may be needing it. Naruto's eyes passed over all in the room, observing their somewhat grim gazes as they looked down onto the map which laid out the battle plan. Our enemy is at Iwa. The agitated voice of the Kazekage echoed off the walls of the hallway and reached the ears of one Sabaku no Temari as she made her way up the stairs to receive the mission she would be assigned today. Judging by Gaara's tone of voice, though, she would have to see what was wrong, though she most likely already knew. In the last few days, rumors among the high-ranking ninja had been circling that Konoha was again on the move, to where was still uncertain, but spies had supposedly reported massive troop movements along the borders and within the villages of Konoha, Am and Kusa. Hopefully they were wrong. But as she entered her brother's office and found several secretaries and messenger ninjas running in and out in what seemed like a panicked frenzy, she knew somewhere in the back of her mind that the rumors may just turn out to be more real than she would like. Gaara. Her voice was barely heard over the background noise, but the red-headed Kazekage snapped his gaze up to meet hers. She saw a grimness in his eyes and immediately knew the answer to her question. Temari. He spoke as he stood up, letting the papers he was holding fall listlessly onto his desk as he gestured her to come over. She walked up next to him and watched as he leaned down to whisper something into her ear. Find Kiba, Sakura, Ino, Shikamaru, Chuji and Hana and tell them to come to the Kazekage mansion at midnight tonight and make sure they are secretive about it. There's a mission of the utmost importance only they can accomplish. She nodded before she turned and walked out the door, the fear beginning to coil around her heart like a slithering snake. The demon of Konoha was returning. The doors to Juju's study room burst open as a young Kunoichi barged in, her expression a mixture of anger, anticipation and wariness. Is it true? She questioned as she marched up to the Raikage's desk. The man calmly looked up from his scroll as he looked at her and spoke. Is what true? Don't play stupid, master, you know exactly what I mean. Is it true that he's on the move again? She nearly growled, allowing her anger and frustration seep into her voice. The Raikage rolled up his scroll before he stood and faced her fully. And even if it is, child, of what concern is it of yours? She looked momentarily taken aback before she spoke again. What do you mean? What concern is it of mine? We've been preparing for nearly 10 years for when he makes his move again. Now he's finally made his move. And we will do nothing until the time is right. He interrupted her firmly before he walked around his desk and looked at her dead in the eye. You are still not ready, Akina. Her teeth ground against each other in anger as she snarled. I've been training for so long, I've mastered my weapon, nearly mastered my lightning element and have gained control of 3 full tails of Kyuubi's chakra. You said that he most likely can't use the Bijuu's chakra for long. If I'm still not ready after all this time, then damn it, when the hell will I be? She screamed the last part out as she pounded the desk in front of her with all her strength. The wood groaned and creaked in protest and the right leg buckled and splintered from the force, allowing it to lean dangerously to one side. Juge watched her as she vented her frustration and remained silent as she continued speaking. Every day, I see him in my dreams, as he kills them over and over. I hear his voice as he says that I'll always be too weak. I want it to end. I want. You desire revenge, but while you have been training, so has he. And unless you follow my instructions, Akina, you will never get your revenge upon him. Be patient, soon the time will come, but not yet. He watched as her shoulders shook from holding back her tears of frustration, anger and acceptance of his words. Juge patted her once on the back before he straightened and silently left his office. His own preparations needed to be made now that Konoha was on the warpath again. He must be ready for when the time came to execute his plans. Soon, Akina, very soon you shall have your revenge and we shall all have our new world. Yoshihiro barged into the council chambers, silencing the uproar of voices that had been squabbling and panicking as he did. He looked over the council members, several of whom were younger than him, before he spoke. All right, listen up because I'll make this extremely quick. Konoha is reported to be advancing on our borders. We'll meet them at the only entry point Konoha now has into Iwa and mount our defenses there. Apparently they've gathered a huge force against us and still have plenty in reserves to guard their borders. Therefore, we need every man, woman and able ninja at our disposal, even yourselves if you're still able. One of the council men stood up. He was young, the Tsuchikage noticed before he spoke. Yoshihiro-sama, the scouts report that the enemy ninja number nearly 3,100 strong. Compared to our force, we have little chance of victory. We should send word for peace towards Konoha and attempt to stave this conflict before it starts. Yoshihiro snorted. Boy, sit down. I've led more wars and fought in more battles than the years you've lived, and I know from his previous actions any attempts at a peace talk will end in failure. He's powerful and ambitious, a deadly combination. Our only choice is a war of attrition. He looked to the rest of the council before he spoke again. Now you are each expected to have your men ready to depart in 2 hours, otherwise it will be considered an act of treason and I will kill you myself. Good day. Before he turned and left as quickly as he had come, old as he was still not someone to be trifled with. As Yoshihiro exited the council room, he caught sight of his nephew Toyohisa. The young man straightened as he saw his uncle approached and offered a smile in greeting. Uncle, how did the me? He stopped as Yoshihiro took off his robe and tossed it over his shoulders before taking off his hat and placing it on his head. You're in charge until I get back. It took him a moment to catch up with what his uncle had said. What? Waiter minute, uncle. He yelled, catching up to the man before he placed himself in front of him as he walked backwards. What do you mean until you get back? I'm coming too. No you're not, the older man stated simply as he continued walking. But uncle, I can't just sit by while. How old is little Yoiru now, Toyohisa? The tall man questioned, locking eyes with his nephew. The younger man paused for a moment at the unexpected inquiry towards his young daughter. She's 3, uncle, you know that. Wouldn't you like to be here when she becomes 4? The question made the young man pause as his uncle continued. I have lived my life already and am proud to have seen you become the man that you are today. I'm sure your parents would have been too. You still have your life to live. Let an old man sacrifice his if it's necessary. But uncle, you're. Yeah. Yoshihiro interrupted him with a wave of his hand. Getting old, I know. He held back a few coughs in his chest before he swallowed and cleared his throat. I am still. The devil Shimazu, I know. The younger man sighed as Yoshihiro placed an arm on his shoulder before he spoke. You'll do fine, kid. If anything happens to me, I leave you as the head of our clan, and I name you my successor as Tsuchikage. Understood. Toyohisa straightened before he placed his hand on his chest and bowed slightly. Yes, sir. Yoshihiro nodded before he walked past him. Shino watched as his ninja leapt silently through the forest. Naruto had appointed him as the commanding general for this attack. Hinata was his second in command and had left Hanabi back in Konoha to watch over the clan affairs while she was gone. Tenten and Lee were their respective lieutenants. While he was not overly concerned over their chances at victory, he was concerned over facing the Tsuchikage himself. The so-called devil Shimazu. Apparently the man had fought in the Iwa Konoha War nearly 30 years ago and had managed to defeat the Sandaime in single combat. While his age may have dulled some of his skills, he was still something to take notice of. Still, Naruto had entrusted the success of this invasion to him, and he would fight to the best of his abilities. Already he had requested additional forces from Kiri as a precaution and had received word that they would be sending Guan's apprentice Mika, and his recently adopted son Tushiro. Indeed, if everything went as planned, Iwa would soon be under their control. Gaara paced back and forth within his backyard, his eyes troubled and concerned as he waited for Temari and the others' arrival. He just couldn't believe it. Now when he was just starting to get a handle over the proverbial mess Suna had become since the death of his father, this crap had to start up and kick up the hornet's nest all over again. Still, this time he will not sit idly by while the council debated like fools. He would do what he had to do to protect Suna. Just then the back door of the house creaked open, revealing Temari, Kiba, Hana, Shikamaru, Sakura, Chuji and Ino. Each of their faces looking grim with a silent smoldering anger within their eyes. No doubt word had already reached their ears. It's good you all came. As Temari probably told you, I have a very important mission for you. They each nodded silently, allowing him to continue. This mission must be carried out with the utmost secrecy. Suna, as of yet, cannot be compromised in this, and should you any of you be captured, I'm afraid no rescue from our part can be made. The need for secrecy is such that I will have to request you give in your headband the moment you choose to accept. Come on, Gaara, what is it already? Kiba growled in annoyance as his impatience got the better of him. Gaara looked straight at them. Intelligence reports Konoha is advancing on Iwa. The Tsuchikage, Yoshihiro Shimazu, is moving to meet them. You are to go and provide assistance to Iwa in their fight against Konoha. Naruto walked through the halls of his estate, the click-clack of his thick heavy boots echoing off the empty halls as the soft whistling of the blowing wind scattered the rotten leaves across the outer courtyard and porches, creating a soft yet somewhat grim and lonely melody as the silvery light of the moon peered down from the heavens. Books, statues, ancient tomes, weapons, armors, ninjantai and kenjutsu scrolls were the only company he had here, the only comforts, the only things he would ever truly have within these empty halls. A truly lonesome existence if there ever was one. But that mattered little to him really, even when he found himself dwelling on the thought. He entered his study and let his eyes travel to a carelessly discarded book on his floor. He walked forward and slowly knelt down to retrieve the fallen text. Placing it back in its proper place, he spoke. "Why are you here? I could ask you the same thing," Jiraiya said as he walked out of the deep shadows of the room, leaning on a cane he sometimes used to ease the burden on his bone-weary legs. It made it easier to underestimate how powerful he still was. "You've always led the armies up to now, what's changed? Why send Shino and Hinata? Unlike before, the elemental nations now know that we are a force to be truly reckoned with. The only reason we ourselves were not assaulted or invaded is because none of them wanted to start a fight they may not be able to finish if other nations do not join. Now that I have attacked one of the remaining two can try to seize the opportunity. I remain here to guard against such an occasion should the need arise. I do not believe Gaara of Suna or Zhuge Liang would attack while I am here." "That could be your ego speaking, Naruto. Don't let your self-assurance turn into arrogance," the Toad Sage warned. "Whatever you wish to call it, Jiraiya, the probabilities of them attacking while I am here and not far off in Iwa is definitely lower than it would be if I was actually gone." Jiraiya had to admit at least that, after all, who would want to take on the person who at the age of 13, almost single-handed conquered 5 shinobi villages, 6 if you counted Konoha itself? "Do you think they'll succeed?" "Nothing is certain, Jiraiya. You of all people should know this." Jiraiya nodded before he looked over to a large table in the center of the study. Piled atop it were dozens upon dozens of scrolls with different markings and seal patterns marked onto them. Jiraiya sighed. "You still haven't figured it out, have you?" Naruto drew his attention away from the current task of organizing the books of his study and onto the table before he walked towards it. Shifting through the old dusty scrolls, he spoke. "No, I have not." Over the years Naruto had been studying seals with Jiraiya's help. Together the two had tried to devise a process which would be able to keep the current aspects of his seal intact while also being able to channel and focuses the demon's chakra properly, in essence fusing the characteristics of his seal and that of his still missing sister. So far the demon's chakra was too volatile, too chaotic and wild to control even the slightest. It was still as damaging now as it was then. Only his physical conditioning could really have any impact on how long he could control the chakra before it began destroying him from the inside out. Truly Naruto had to admit that his father was a true master among seals, far surpassing Jiraiya and most likely any before him. It was yet another reason for finding his sister, apart from permanently removing her from the face of the earth, and subsequently returning Kyuubi to his part of the seal. He could also study her seal and perhaps modify his with her design. Still it was a moot point. None of his spies had heard or seen hide nor hair of the girl since the short confrontation 9 years ago. The girl along with Tsunade had quite literally fallen off the face of the earth. Jiraiya watched as Naruto suddenly paused in his brief overlook over the old scrolls and got that look again. He knew that look well. It came every time he would think about his lost sister. The change in his eyes was a subtle thing. The slight edge and hardness that gripped them would be almost unrecognizable to anyone else but not to him. He was perceptive in his own way and has known the boy long enough to be able to pick up on his little subtleties here and there. The toad hermit sighed tiredly. Truly the world of the shinobi was a tiring one, and sometimes he envied those that had died young. That old phrase of, dying's easy, had never been so true. Stepping back into the shadows of the room, the old hermit made his exit as silently as he had come. The silent group of 7 Suna ninja sat around the crackling embers of a fire as they cooked some fish they had caught in a small stream nearby. Temari allowed her eyes to pass over each of them, taking in their expressions and their forms in a contemplative manner. Kiba was silent, a first from the dog ninja, staring into the fire with such intensity he seemed almost feral, with his fangs slightly peeking out from his lower lip and the claws lightly digging into his arms. The boy truly looked more like a beast than a human. Chuji was no better. his eyes smoldering with the promise of revenge for the death of his father. His jaw set in a firm, tense line as he sat unmoving. It was truly strange to see the ever-happy and overall nice guy so hateful. It was the only word she could think of. Almost unnatural even. Shikamaru laid back, his expression in the same bored way it usually was, but she could see in his eyes as he looked up to the stars his own anticipation for the coming chance for revenge on the Konoha Jinchuriki. Sakura, while she did not share the same fire of hatred and revenge within her eyes as she did not lose as much to the Jinchuriki in the attack, the fire within her eyes was different. It was determination to help her friends. She wanted to help them get their revenge and find their own personal peace against the Konoha nin. Hana was much like her brother, silent and cold. The Hachimaru triplets, her personal companions, growled lowly as they too felt her anger and pain. Kuromaru and Sume had been precious to them as well. Ino, however, was the worst of them. The bangs of her hair shadowed her eyes as her fists clenched. Possibly unconsciously, the brief glimpses she had taken into her normally warm blue eyes had left her stunned. Her eyes wore a deep dark hatred within them, even worse than the others. There was something truly evil within her gaze. Temari herself could only remember the fear. The fear she had felt when he had fought against Gaara. That unwavering terror as he held his blade to her brother's throat while she and Kankuro had been helpless to do anything to stop him. Those terrible red eyes that watched her from the blackness. It sent a chill down her spine every time she remembered. But she was Sabaku no Temari, and while she might be afraid she would sooner burn in hell before she allowed her friends to go to fight while she sat idly by and did nothing. She would fight, and she would help them as best she could. The merchant city of Sakai was a large trading city. It was easily the richest, non-shinobi city in the elemental countries. The reason for their wealth was simple: it covered one of the major intersections of the shinobi world. If Suna, Kusa, Am or Taki wished to arrive to Kumo, they had to pass through this city and vice versa. If Konoha or anybody besides Suna wanted to enter Iwa, they had to pass right through here, as this was the only pass through the steep mountains. If Iwa wanted to go to any other village, they had to pass through here. Half the city was located between the high jagged peaks of the canyons, offering it a natural defense. High towers, built on the rocks themselves, flanked the city, providing additional long-range supporting fire to ground troops through the use of flanking fire from the stone galleys. 3 stone walls that would each have to be breached before the city could be considered taken. Sakai was formerly within the Iwa territory, though they were mainly independent and relied on its sister city for almost nothing save for an annual fee and grant Iwa control of its militia in times of war. Unless the city of Sakai fell, the conquest of Iwa would never succeed. Shino ducked under an overhead swing from one of the soldiers before he swerved around the man coming up behind him before he wrapped him in a headlock and stabbed him twice in the back with a kunai, before he pulled it out and threw it to another approaching soldier, catching him in the throat. The man gurgled and choked on his blood before he finally collapsed, dead. Shino then threw the warrior still in his grasp over the edge of the wall, letting him plummet to the floor below. The united Konoha army pushed forward, breaking the lines of the militiamen and, up till now, few shinobi. Shino allowed himself to relax a moment before he spoke into his earpiece. Hinata, Lee, Tenten. How are things at your end? Yoshihave, Shino cut off the connection. Obviously Lee had the situation under control. My men are moving towards the city gate, we're on schedule. I'm almost done with my side, we'll be able to assault the eastern wall soon. Also Shino, messengers are saying our reinforcements from Kiri should be arriving soon in about another 30 minutes. Shino nodded. Very well, my men are already moving forward, we'll be able to link up with Lee and Hina. Shino's head suddenly snapped upwards as a massive shadow passed overhead. He barely made out the silhouette of a large man before. Crash! A massive cloud of dust and rubble obscured the area before Shino leapt out, flipping in mid-air before landing lightly on his feet. Looking into the dust cloud as it began to clear. Hey, damn, I really am getting old. 10 years ago that attack would have cleaved your skull wide open, kid. A rough, aged voice reached Shino's ears before the face of his attacker came into view. As the dust cleared, he came across the sight of a man in full battle armor, a large hammer slung over his shoulder as he looked down on the Konoha ninja with a wide smirk over his face. Well now boy, you can just call me the devil. The devil? You are Yoshihiro Shimazu then? Yoshihiro's smirk only grew. I suppose I am, he replies as he settles into a heavily offense-oriented stance which Shino recognizes to have been used by many ninja that use large weapons, such as the Seven Swordsmen and some Iwa nins who specialized in kenjutsu during the war. Shino adjusted his glasses further up his nose. It was the only warning Yoshihiro had before a swarm of Kikaichu converged behind him, forming one of the Abarame's signature clones who tried to plunge a kunai into the back of his skull. Shino watches as the older man catches the clone's movement from the corner of his eyes before he smirks, craning his neck to the side, evading the strike before he plunged the spike end of his hammer into the clone's gut, forcing the Kikaichu to disperse and return to Shino's body. Hey, if that's the best you got, I won't even need this old thing, he says as he straps the war hammer to his back. Shino again adjusts his glasses before he speaks. I see. Before he vanishes in another swarm of Kikaichu. Yoshihiro watches as hundreds of the pests swarm the air around him, creating a decent shade as their sheer numbers nearly blocked out the sun. Suddenly the bugs grouped together next to him and formed a near-solid mass that hit him square across the face, making the older man stumble back with a grunt followed by another mass of Kikaichu that hit him across the lower back, forcing him to stumble forward, nearly falling to the ground. Yoshihiro grunted before yet another mass of Kikaichu appeared slightly beneath him and slammed into his stomach, propelling him upwards enough to knock him flat on his back, 7 feet from his original position. The Kikai swarm hovered over him as the larger man let out a bellowing chuckle. Hey, not bad kid. Yoshihiro compliments as he stands up fingering a kunai Shino from his hidden viewpoint recognized as his own. He had placed it so the would land on it when he fell. That would have taken out any common grunt pretty easily. But then again, I am far from common. Shino spun around in time to receive a fist straight to the face, knocking his shades off his nose and sending him careening through a second-story window and back into the courtyard where Yoshihiro had previously been standing. He looked up in time to see the original Yoshihiro melt into a pile of dirt and rocks. A clone. But I never even saw him make the hand seals. A shadow loomed over his form. Looking up he saw Yoshihiro standing there with that same smirk on his face. Get up, brat. We're far from done yet. Shino, can you hear me? Hinata's eyes narrowed, getting nothing but static on her radio before she looked to the general direction she knew the bug user to be. Tenten. Yeah, the weapon mistress answered back. I'll go see if Shino's in trouble. Press the attack and if I don't report back in 20 minutes, pull the men back, got it? Wah, hey wait a minute. Hinata turned off her radio before she pocketed it and made her way to the northeastern side of the city. Shino grunted as an armored fist buried itself deep within his gut, sending him skidding across the floor before he came to a stop, gripping his abdomen with one arm as he held a kunai defensively on the other. If there was any doubt about this man's skill before, there was certainly none now. While taijutsu had never been his strong point and he admitted that that's basically all they had been using for this fight since he exposed his hiding place, the old man's moves should be clunky and slow due to the heavy armor. But he moved almost as easily as Lee did with the spandex. Not only that, but metal-covered fists hurt a lot more than normal. And that hammer on his back, while Shino hadn't really seen it in action apart from his initial attack, his Kikaichu were telling him that the weapon itself held some odd power, one that was not to be taken lightly. Yoshihiro cracked his neck, knuckles and shoulder. Hey, I'm surprised you kept your lunch in your gut after that, brat. Most would have probably hacked up their spleen. Shino had to admit that too, he was still trying to get the air back into his lungs. Still, straightening his back, the bug user formed his hand seals before he extended his arms forward and another swarm of Kikaichu headed for the Tsuchikage. Same old tricks. Yoshihiro smirked as he began forming his own hand seals for a jutsu. Only a finely tuned sixth sense gave him enough warning to lean back in time to avoid another Shino which came straight down from above with a kunai attempting to cleave his skull open, helmet and all. Before he hit the floor, he dispersed in another swarm of Kikaichu. Yoshihiro snapped his gaze up to the original swarm as it formed yet another Shino, with a claw-like appendage in the place of a right arm, reminiscent of a prey mantis which pierced the Tsuchikage's throat with a sickening wet slice. Only to have the older nin vanish and be replaced by a log before an earth spike appeared below and impaled the clone, dispersing the Kikaichu. Not bad, young one. Yoshihiro complimented as he looked to where the original Shino had been standing only to find it empty. An explosion from the ground to his right was the only warning he had in order to roll onto his side to avoid whatever attack the young bug user had used against him. He stood up, only for his helmet to fall off of his head, the small rope which held it there cut. Checking the area, he found a small dribble of blood along the side of his neck. Smirking, he looked upon Shino as the bug boy hovered above the ground in front of him, a pair of dragonfly-like wings formed by the Kikaichu on his back and one praying mantis-like appendage in replacement of his right arm, also formed by Kikaichu. Not bad at all, the old man repeated as his smirk only grew, gripping the hilt of the war hammer on his back with anticipation. Tenten's long straight sword dug deep into the man's stomach. The Konoha Junin grunted before she pushed the blade with enough force to go completely through him, pulling upwards so as to open the wound more before she pulled it out. Turning on her heel, she twirled a kunai in her other hand before she threw it with expert accuracy through the crowd of rushing ally and enemy ninja, hitting her target, an Iwa ninja's throat, dead center, stopping him from delivering the killing blow onto one of her fellow Konoha nins. Looking to her right, she found another of the militiamen approaching, his blade raised high in an aggressive stance. Twirling slightly to the side, she parried the man's downward strike so it passed behind her as she spun around, her own blade held so it went along her spine before she came around with a low swing, separating the man's leg from the rest of him. Taking out yet another kunai, the kunoiki buried it into the center of his back, piercing his spinal cord and killing him near instantly. She paused as she felt a strong pulse of what felt like Shino's chakra, followed shortly by a larger burst of another chakra she didn't recognize. She was brought out of her musings as she heard more approaching footsteps behind her. Taking out a double-bladed kunai from one of the many slots in her clothing, she turned, parrying the man's weapon before she brought the blade back, slitting his throat with ease before placing the weapon back in its place. Another massive crash and dust cloud spread throughout the courtyard. Shino's form could be seen as it rose above the cloud, the wings behind him moving rapidly in an attempt to lift him as fast as possible. The reason was soon revealed as a massive mud dragon followed his form shortly after, the armor-covered form of the Tsuchikage at its head. "What's wrong, brat?" Yoshihiro taunted as he blocked some hastily thrown kunai. Shino extended his free hand and another swarm of Kikaichu flew out of his wrists, latching onto the dragon, making it slowly crumble into nothingness as they ate the chakra that held it together. With a strong leap, Yoshihiro lunged for the bug user, his hammer raised in preparation to smash the Shino's head to bits. Swerving up and above, he appeared behind Yoshihiro, placing his hand on the man's back, forcing dozens of Kikaichu onto him. Soon, the purple-like armor turned brown, followed by the rest of him, revealing yet another Earth clone. Where did the bug user turned around, catching sight of Yoshihiro's war hammer heading straight for him. Swerving as best he could in order to dodge, the hammer still caught one of his wings, throwing him off balance as the Kikaichu struggled to reform quick enough. Yoshihiro would not allow him that chance, however, as a hail of kunai and shuriken assaulted Shino as he tried to reform his wing. The bug user blocked as best he could with his blade-like appendage and another kunai he had hastily drawn. It was not enough, however, as two kunai pierced his upper left thigh and his left bicep. Shino grunted before looking at the general building the kunai had come from. Before he threw some more of his own, these with explosive tags. With great blasts the tags went off, sending a minor shockwave through the area around him. Suddenly something slammed into his side, pushing the air right out of him, and he heard two distinct snaps from his rib area before he was sent careening into the side of a building and down to the floor. Shino coughed as he struggled to his knees, coughing up blood as searing pain shot through his chest. He looked up, finding Yoshihiro a few yards away, his hammer over his shoulder and signature smirk on his face. "Hey, well kid, it's been fun. But I gotta keep moving," the older man said as he raised the hammer over his head. "As the devil, let me be the one to send you off to hell." He yelled out the last part as he slammed the hammer down onto the floor. A trail of jagged earth spikes made their way towards Shino. The Konoha bug user tried to move, but the sheer burning agony any movement, even breathing, caused at this point halted him before he even made it to his feet. Two strong yet feminine arms wrapped around his chest and hauled him up away from the attack, forcing him to bite back a scream of as the movement jostled his ribs. Yoshihiro smirked as he found an empty space where Shino's impaled form should have been. He let his eyes travel a bit more to the left, finding the new arrival of one Hyuga Hinata as she set her comrade down, well away from the action around them. A Hyuga A. Been a while since I faced any of you guys, he said, placing the hammer back on his shoulder and straightening up, settling himself in a relaxed stance. Don't worry, Hinata whispered to the heavily breathing Shino. Leave it to me. As she moved to stand, Shino grabbed her sleeve, halting her. Be careful. I have the feeling he may have just been toying with me. Hinata nodded before she stood and faced her new opponent. Yoshihiro smirked. Now then, why don't I show you why they call me the devil? As he spoke these words, numerous seals glowed over the iron skin of his armor, revealing hundreds of tiny little patterns. Before the glow died down, Hinata noticed the chakra output increase quite a bit, as well as the faint green glow that now surrounded him. The smirk remained as he took his stance. Right, now let's see how well you do, girl. That will be all for this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos. Goodbye.